Good. Welcome to Florida Climate Week, and this session is called Natural Climate Solutions, the Power of Parks and Public Lands. Thank you for joining us today. We're from the Trust for Public Land, and we're going to introduce our panelists to start. Go ahead, Brendan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brendan Shane, the Climate Director for TPL. I sit in the DC office and support Kate in Florida and all of our teams across the country on climate issues. Taj.
Hey there, Taj Shotland. I'm the Associate Director of the Trust for Public Lands National Climate Program based in Vermont, but I work nationally and really happy to be here today. Kate.
Hi, I'm Kate Brown. I'm Senior Project Manager in the Florida office of the Trust for Public Land. I'm based in Tallahassee, and I do parks and land protection projects primarily, and excited to be here.
Hi, Brian Taverny, GIS Project Manager. I assist with all TPL strategies, including the climate strategy. And I was one of the technical team members who brought together the conservation carbon map that you'll see a little bit later on in this presentation.
Great. Here's our roadmap for this session. We did our introductions, and I'm going to do a brief overview of the Trust for Public Land. We're going to talk about natural climate solutions, some case studies from Florida, an overview of our conservation carbon map and a demonstration, and wrap up on closing thoughts. So at the Trust for Public Land, we believe that access to the outdoors is a fundamental human need and essential to our health and well-being, that people need parks. That's our mission. Our commitments, we have 4 commitments for our work. Community is the 4th one, but it's really at the heart of everything that we do. We're looking to improve health, equity, climate, and communities all around the country, and we work through our parks and lands work and other initiatives to do that. So here are the 4 initiatives that we use to meet those commitments: lands, trails, parks, and schoolyards. The lands initiative is mainly working with private landowners and public agencies to get land into public ownership and stewardship. We advocate for trails all around the country and try to connect communities via trail networks. We build and design and build parks for communities where parks are sorely needed. And we've learned that schoolyards can serve a dual purpose of serving students and kids during the day, during school time, and communities after hours. So we work with communities on renovating schoolyards. So far, we've put more than 9 million people within a 10-minute walk of a park. And here's a few more stats of what we've done to date. 5,000 projects, $84 billion in public funding that we've helped to generate, and creating access to over 3.7 million acres of public lands for people all over the country. But there's still a lot of work to do. Obviously, we've learned through our research that 100 million people still don't have access to a close to home park, including 28 million children. So that's something that we're working to change. We have a 5-year strategic plan. We're about halfway through that right now, and we set some pretty ambitious goals to meet for our work over this 5-year period. And here's what they are in a nutshell. We intend to generate $10 billion in funding for land protection and establish 500 protected places, parks, and conservation lands. We want to put a quality park within a 10-minute walk of 5 million more people, work with 20 school districts to bring community schoolyards to them, and connect more than 3 million people to 1,000 miles of local trails and greenways. It's a lot. And I am now going to toss it over to Brendan.
Thank you, Kate. Yeah, as Kate mentioned, climate in our current strategic plan became one of our core commitments across the organization. And so our main message is that natural areas are critical to protecting the climate. and therefore that protects people. And the basic mechanism here, many of you may know, is the fact that natural systems, vegetation, trees can capture and store carbon, in addition to a whole range of other benefits we get from nature. But as you see here, as vegetation grows, you have carbon captured from the air and stored in tree trunks and other vegetation, and also significant amounts stored in soils or coastal wetlands area. Florida is a beautiful state with many natural areas, and all of those are holding carbon to varying degrees. And so when you look across Florida, you see that natural lands there store 940 million metric tons of carbon, which is sort of a big sounding number, but just to try to put an equivalency on that, that's the equivalent to burning 1.9 billion tons of coal. So by holding and protecting our natural areas, we can really have a significant climate impact. Kate, the next slide talks about that a little bit. Folks, you'll hear this referred to in different ways, but natural climate solutions is sort of the most common language. Sometimes you'll hear nature-based climate solutions. But the idea behind our focus and our work and discussion today is that these can be a significant part of our overall climate protection picture. Clearly, we need electrification of vehicles and houses, and we need more energy efficiency and lots more renewable energy and those other elements of an overall climate plan. But natural systems play a really critical role. And so globally, improved use of natural climate solutions could account for 1/3 of the emissions we need to stay on track with global climate targets. And in the United States, it's a little less, but it's still very significant that if you tap into the potential of better conservation, improve forest management, land management across protected areas and also agricultural areas, you could absorb up to 21% of the emissions that we're producing on an annual basis. And this is sort of it's described different ways, but there's two sides of this. One is it's really critical that we protect what exists today, right? So Florida's coastal inland natural areas are important carbon stocks. We need to protect what's there. And not just for carbon, clearly it's for all those other water quality, health benefits, recreation benefits, and community benefits. And then in addition, we need to go and restore what's been degraded. So that can include urban areas and planting trees and restoring, or it can be changes to the way we use agricultural lands or the way we protect coastal lands. The last slide there, just to sort of indicate how this is reflected in TPL's goals. So we really focus on the 3 prongs, right? So nature is going to bring you more resilient communities that in many instances also can reverse longstanding structural inequities and build opportunity, right? We were very focused at TPL on creating access to nature where people don't have access, underrepresented, underserved communities. And then through all of it, when you're using nature, you're going to get benefits to reducing carbon emissions and increasing carbon capture. So I'll turn it back over to you, Kate.
Thanks, Brendan. So let's talk about some Florida-specific case studies. So just a little bit of an overview on our state. As you may probably know, if you're in Florida, we have 1,350 miles of coastline. We're the 3rd largest state by population, and we're growing by 600 or more people every day. And some people think it's 1,000 people per day, but people are moving here in droves. So we'll talk a little bit about the impacts of that in a minute, but this is our project map is showing all the projects we've completed since 1974, which is when we began working in Florida. We were the first office opened in Florida outside of TPL, first office opened in the United States outside of California, which is our first, our headquarters where we started. So we've done 400 plus land protection projects and park projects in the last almost 50 years and have created more than $20 billion in conservation ballot measures just in the state of Florida over that time. So this is just something I like to remind myself of, that we're in a very vulnerable place. We're especially vulnerable here. We're a peninsula. Most of the state is a peninsula, and many residents don't have the resources to adapt to climate change. We have a lot of storms, very frequent storms in the Gulf and in the Atlantic, and many decades of poorly planned development, and our low-lying geography. It's a recipe for a lot of problems. And so we all know that's the issue, and we're trying to do our part to help alleviate it. So let's talk about some examples. I'm going to give you three kind of categories of examples here. Excuse me. The first is waterfront parks, then we're going to talk about the Florida Gulf Coast Trail, and finally about some of our larger landscape land protection work. So in terms of waterfront parks, we've been working for a long time, but over the last decade or so, especially on trying to protect land for people to enjoy along our waterways. We find that a lot of times these areas are closed off to the public. They're highly developable. They're very much at risk from storms and flooding. And there just isn't adequate access for most people who want to get to our waterways. So we're trying to change that by providing more public access, preventing development of new structures in the path of storms. And this is an example of a park out in Okaloosa County in Destin that we built using funds from the Deepwater Horizon spill settlement. It's probably an $11 or $12 million park between purchasing the land and building it. But it does have resilient features. It has these features. A splash pad was very much wanted by the community for just a respite from the heat in the summertime. So that gets a lot of use. But this is just one of 5 parks we built with Deepwater Horizon funding along the Florida Panhandle that was most affected by the spill. Next slide. Thank you. This is a project going on now. It's actually not completed yet, but I just thought I would throw in something current. This is a beachfront park also in Destin. We seem to be doing a lot of work there, but they have a severe need for additional public beach access. So we're helping them to acquire a new 3-acre beachfront park for $14 million that will, there you can see in that picture that there are some old 1960s era houses there. Those are short-term rentals. They'll be torn down to make way for a new public park that will just have some real basic low impact amenities, a boardwalk and a restroom, small restroom building and parking, and that's about it. But this is a really important community project, both for tourism and for locals. To have access to the beach is very tough in this area, and lots of the beach is blocked off by private landowners who are restricting people's access. So we're trying to change that. And this is funded by tourism development dollars, which is the perfect use for those because it helps not just provide access to locals, but tourists alike, and to keep that economy going. Next slide. This is a picture of the Florida Gulf Coast Trail, where we recently invested in a full-time staff person to help really get this program up and running. We've been working in this area of Southwest Florida, Pinellas to Collier County for a long time, buying real corridors and helping transform them into trails. But we decided that this area warranted a bigger commitment from Trust for Public Land. There are lots of gaps to fill. There's about 100 miles of this trail in place, and we're working with communities all along that corridor to try to see where we can fill in those gaps to provide safe routes to schools and parks and neighborhoods and get people off the roads. Obviously, when the weather is pleasant enough to do that, but there seems to be a lot of interest in this, and we're really going to be spending a lot of time on that in the next few years. Our land protection work is all over the state. I'm going to show you an example from Santa Rosa County, which is Wolf Creek Forest. This is, you can go to the next slide. Thanks, Taj. There's a map here. I'm sorry, it's a little not that easy to read, but we're doing a multi-year acquisition project working with the state and various federal agencies and Whitingfield Naval Air Station to purchase about 10,000 acres. Maybe it'll end up being more of land in this region in the red there, connecting an ecological corridor between Blackwater River State Forest and the Naval Air Station. This is a important area for recreation. It also is part of the longleaf pine forest ecosystem, which is used to cover most of the southeast, but it's very, very limited at this point. So there will be longleaf pine restoration happening in this area as part of this project. So this is just one of many large landscape scale projects that are going on in the state. This just happens to be one we're working on now to try to really protect those forests that we have left. Okay. And I'm gonna, I think, turn it to Brian.
I think I'm going to take over, but then I'll turn it over to
Todd,
Brian
sorry.
in
Go
a few
ahead.
minutes. No worries. So that was amazing to hear all of the great work that's happening in Florida, conservation work, park building work. And so now I'm going to share a little bit about a new resource that we developed called the Conservation Carbon Map. And as you learn about it, you'll see there are opportunities to include this new resource in new conservation work that's happening. So all the great work that TPL is doing, I know there are lots of other organizations and agencies doing land conservation work in Florida. And so the Conservation Carbon Map can be a tool that helps maximize the climate benefits and figure out where different conservation projects and conservation investments can provide the greatest climate benefits. So the Carbon Map, the original tool, was created in partnership with American Forest about 5 years ago, and it was essentially developed as a proof of concept. And it was originally envisioned as a resource to help guide policy and really make the case for forestry being an important climate solution. The tool was designed specifically to help answer 3 key questions. Where are existing forest carbon stocks? What and where are the threats to those carbon stocks from wildfire, disease and pests and development? And then where can conservation of those carbon-rich landscapes, where can protecting them also provide the greatest impact by providing additional co-benefits, such as protecting rare ecosystems, source water protection, and habitat cores. And the structure of the tool was set up so that you could view data for private land, for public land, a combination of the two, and it was aggregated essentially at the state and county scale. So you could see what counties have the most carbon, have the least amount of carbon, the greatest threats. And there was some parcel level data, but only for a handful of states, and it wasn't particularly comprehensive. And that wasn't really what it was designed for. It wasn't designed originally to make those parcel level conservation decisions, but more on that in a second. So just briefly running through a couple examples of how folks used this original tool that we developed. So back in the spring of 2019, the New York legislature was debating the New York climate. It was the Climate Leadership and Protection Act. And we submitted testimony to the legislature advocating for provisions that would allow conservation to contribute to the state's overall goal of, I think it was reducing 85%, what was it, 85% in GHG emissions by 2050. And in the testimony, we highlighted the existing forest carbon stocks throughout the state. We attached a statewide profile report that we generated using the carbon map, making the case for all of these carbon-rich landscapes that were on private land and public land. And we highlighted how that they were vulnerable to different threats. And the end result, thanks to the hard work of a lot of different folks, was that the final legislation did in fact provide for forest carbon offsets to be part of the state's larger strategy. Another interesting use case is in Wisconsin. So we worked with the Nature Conservancy and others to lead a feasibility study requested by the state to sort of lay out a path for them to scale up natural climate solutions and generate additional funding for natural climate solutions in the state. And we used the tool to provide a concise summary, sort of a primer for agency leads and state politicians before diving really into the weeds of the different funding mechanisms. And that carbon map was a tool that we were able to summarize for them the existing carbon stocks, where they were threatened, and how much actual carbon was in their natural landscape. So after we created the proof of concept, we had folks starting to use the tool. We conducted what we call a requirements analysis, where we interviewed key stakeholders to understand how we could improve the tool to make it as useful as possible for the most number of people. And you can see the long list of folks that we interviewed representing many different stakeholders. And what we heard loud and clear was that the tool, as it was originally developed, was useful for guiding policy and for advocacy, but it was almost impossible to use for making actual parcel level conservation decisions, right? You've a limited amount of conservation funding, and there are a couple parcels that you could conserve. Do you want to conserve this parcel, or do you want to conserve this parcel? The tool was not designed and wasn't able to answer that question at the time. However, folks expressed a real need for that. We also heard from folks that the user interface wasn't particularly intuitive and that there was really some room for improvement. And then a lot of folks also expressed an interest in having the ability to run watershed scale analyses. A lot of land trusts hone in on specific watersheds, specifically, state land trusts. And so the ability to look at watersheds across a state and identify priority ones that had the most carbon and that were the most vulnerable to development. So we took all of that great feedback and we set out to create version 2.0, what we call the conservation carbon map. And before I talk about the new tool and before Brian gives a demo of that new tool, I just want to highlight that tool was developed 5 years ago, the initial version. And in that 5 years, a lot has changed. There are a growing number of resources available to help really make the case for and really guide conservation investments, which is A, amazing, but B, it also means that it's a more crowded field. And so there's a really important need for us to be intentional in the resources that we're developing, and we're not duplicating the great work that others are already doing. We want to be able to answer unique questions that folks have that they're not able to already answer. And so we're very conscious of trying to make this tool as useful as possible to those key stakeholders. And so we met with folks from the Nature Conservancy, American Forests, Open Space Institute, Land Trust Alliance, and others to go over our work plan, proposed updates, and get feedback to make sure that the proposed work plan and what we were creating, sort of the version 2.0, was actually going to be useful. So what's changed from the first version? So that one of the biggest changes was bringing in new high-resolution forest carbon data. It was developed by Dr. Chris Williams in partnership, I think, with NASA and some others. And this new data shows both carbon storage, so those areas that already have a lot of carbon, and carbon sequestration values, those areas that are drawing down high amounts of carbon on an annual basis out of the atmosphere. And the data is much higher resolution. So previously we were using 250 meter resolution data, and now we're using 30 meter resolution data, which essentially just means it's a finer scale and it's more accurate. And you can see here up on the slide, the accuracy is pretty outstanding when compared to field measurements. So the new and updated data, you can see here sort of the laundry list of what's changed between the original version and the most recent version of the tool. So there's the new carbon data, co-benefits data. We replaced the EPA source water protection with the US Forest Service forest to faucets data set. Under threats, we updated the insects and disease risk, and we also updated wildfire hazard. And then for the user interface improvements, we added clear navigation, ability to search for locations, different base maps. And then I just want to highlight here, the biggest leap forward was actually tagging all of this carbon data and all of this threats data and all the co-benefit data to individual parcels and individual watersheds. And so we did this for over 3 million parcels across the country that are over 100 acres. So it's really a significant undertaking for our geospatial team to be able to do this and create that so that anyone can go in, pull up parcels in your state that are over 100 acres that you maybe are thinking of conserving or already have conserved, and be able to pull up all of that carbon data that you can then use for grant proposals, advocacy, outreach, community meetings, engaging with local leaders, lots of different ways to use that data. So the tool rollout, the work was underway in early 2022. Over the spring, we started beta testing the new tool. TPL and our partners, whenever you create a new tool, undoubtedly there are going to be minor bugs in the system. So we worked to identify those. We did a soft launch over the summer, and in the fall, we're really launching into a full dedicated outreach and engagement strategy, providing technical assistance and sharing use cases and lessons learned. So I'll stop there, and I'm going to turn it over to Brian to do an actual live demo. Stop sharing my screen to do a live demo of the new tool. Over to you, Brian.
Thanks, Tosh. Everybody seeing the landing page?
Looks good.
Sounds good. Okay, so when you visit Conservation Carbon Map, this is the place you'll start out. This is the landing page for the web application. It's got a lot of great background as well as resources. There's a link to provide you with a description of the data sets that Taj was referring to that have been incorporated and are available through the tool itself. There's also a link that provides you with access to the mapping application. And the first time you click on that link and access the application, you'll be asked to go through a 30-second process of setting up your own free user account. This is just to allow us to track level of use and interest in the tool. When you actually have access to the tool, and forgive me for one moment, the bar for Zoom was hiding the next tab over, so I apologize for that slight delay. But when you're actually in the tool itself, this is what it will look like. This tool, as Taj mentioned earlier, is set up to allow users to address 3 different questions. First, where across the lower 48 states do we have the greatest carbon services being provided? Second, where are those carbon services threatened? And finally, if we act to address those threats, what additional co-benefits beyond carbon services might we enjoy? And then beyond that, you can ask and answer those questions at multiple scales across the lower 48 states. As Taj talked about just a moment ago, you can look at those questions at state, county, parcel, as well as watershed scales. But given the focus of this audience, I'm going to start out this demonstration by clicking on the state of Florida and zooming us into that geography. And here what we see initially visualized at the county scale is the amount of forest carbon being stored per county. So darker green indicating a greater amount. And currently it's focused just on public lands. We want to be able to visualize public and private. So I'm going to come up here to ownership and toggle over to all. So now what we see is carbon storage across all lands, public and private, at the county scale. So you can see there's quite a bit of a concentration of carbon storage in the northern part of Florida. Before going on to look at some of the other variables, I just want to pause for a moment and point out the other ways that this information is presented on the website. On the right-hand side of the map, you'll see a tabular view that shows you for each county the metric tons of carbon stored. Reports out the top 10 counties in terms of carbon storage. If you scroll down, you'll see a number of text boxes that report carbon equivalencies using EPA calculations. So for example, you have the social value of carbon, its market value, miles, vehicle miles driven, amongst some others. You also have this neat graphic that is a bar chart showing you how carbon storage breaks out by public and private land ownership. So there's a lot of different ways that this information is presented, can be digested, and hopefully used by folks interested in conservation carbon map. Scrolling back up, take a look at the other type of carbon service that can be visualized with this tool, that is sequestration. So we toggle on yearly sequestration potential. And this is basically the amount of carbon that is taken from the atmosphere and stored by forest year over year. And as with carbon storage, we can see quite a bit of sequestration is occurring in the northern part of the state. So we've got a good sense at this point that northern part of the state is important for forest carbon services. What threats might those services face? We can come up here and toggle on the threats tab. And there are 3 different types of threats that Taj already mentioned earlier that we can look at, starting out with housing development. So the darker red the color, the greater the risk of development. You can see there is some overlap of housing development risk and carbon services in the state of Florida. We can also look at the risk of forest insect and disease. And as might be expected, there's quite a bit of overlap between the carbon services provided by forest and the risk of forest insect and disease. And the final threat we can look at is wildfire. And there are some warm orange colors that do co-occur with those northern counties, but we see the greatest threat of wildfire risk in the southern tip of the state. So at this stage, we know carbon services are concentrated in the northern part of the state. There's some threat to it, especially from forest, insect, and disease. If we took actions to address those threats, what type of co-benefits might we enjoy? Well, we can look at 3 different co-benefits using the tool. First, rare ecosystems. Darker green the color, the greater the concentration of rare ecosystems. We can see quite a bit of that co-benefit occurs in the southern portion of the state. We can also look at the importance of forests for providing quality, clean drinking water to communities. And we see, in this case, particularly important in that central portion of the state. And the final co-benefit we can look at is really from a habitat perspective. These are called habitat cores. There are large habitat patches that are relatively wide, are important for biodiversity and wildlife. And in this case, you can see quite a bit of overlap between those habitat cores and the carbon services that are being provided by forests in the state. So at this point, we've been able to go through at the county scale and address those 3 questions about carbon services, threats, and co-benefits. But as we talked about earlier, you can use the tool to address those questions at multiple scales, including for parcels and watersheds. But I'm going to click on the County of Duval. So I know that TPL in Florida has been engaged in land protection work in this county. And wait for a moment while the map loads, perhaps knowing, oh, there we go. We're starting to load now. We see the county boundary coming in red, and then the parcels are shown in purple. And as Taj mentioned earlier, these are parcels more than 100 acres in size. And I know that in Duval County, a place that we've done some work is Black Hammock Island. So I can come down to the address bar here, type in Black Hammock Island and hit enter, and a marker will show up telling me where that's located. And I can use the navigation tools to zoom into Black Hammock Island, get a look at the parcels associated with that island. I know this parcel is co-located with some of the land management or land protection work that TPL in Florida has been doing on Black Hammock Island. This is a location that's important for passive recreation as well as wildlife. And if we wanted to get some sense of the carbon services provided by this parcel, we can click on it. Pop-up box will show the carbon services, the threats, and the co-benefits associated with that parcel. We come down here, we can click on generate PDF report. It'll take about 30 seconds to a minute, but I've already done that ahead of time. You can generate the PDF report showing you those carbon equivalencies, forest carbon services, threats, and co-benefits for the parcel. You're also going to map the parcel itself. Coming back, we'll close out the pop-up window. And in some cases, you're going to be interested in more than just one parcel or watershed for that matter. But we've got this multi-selection tool where you can click on the multi-selection tool and then come to the map and drag a rectangle to select more than one parcel. You can see they're now highlighted in yellow. And you can come down here to the lower right corner of the map and click on generate report to generate a PDF report containing information for both those parcels that we just selected. And so that's what you see here. Got a cover page showing the parcels, and then you've got an individual parcel report showing you the services, threats, and co-benefits for each one of those individual parcels. We can clear that selection. It'll zoom us back out to the county scale. We can also X out Black Hammock Island. And you might be somebody who's interested in looking at things from a watershed perspective rather than parcel perspective. And we can come up to this geography bar and toggle on watersheds. And just in a moment, it'll zoom out, show us the watersheds that are intersecting this county. And just as for parcels, we can click on a watershed and get a nice pop-up window telling us about the carbon services, threats, and co-benefits. And then click on PDF report, and we'll get a very similar report to what we have for the parcels, where we've got the carbon equivalencies, services, threats, and co-benefits, as well as a map of the watershed itself. And so that's the overview I wanted to provide you with of this tool, letting you know that you can use this tool in land protection work when thinking about return on investments with respect to the carbon services that are being provided in the landscape and the geography that you're working in. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brendan.
I'll come off mute. Thanks, Brian and Taj for the overview and demo. We'll just do a few wrap-up thoughts here. Actually, we'll maybe go into the next slide, Taj. Just to sort of reiterate, the big picture here. Very often when folks focus on climate, they will, as I mentioned earlier, they'll rightly be very concerned about emissions, energy, renewable energy, cleaner sources, waste, a whole range of issues. But oftentimes the natural side of the climate solution, natural climate solutions are left out. And there's been a very concerted effort over the last 4 or 5 years in particular to correct that, to make sure people understand that natural systems play a really important role in a whole range of climate protection. And some of that is keeping people cool under a shady tree, protecting an exposed and a coastline that's eroding or threatened by storms. And another very significant part of that is capturing and storing the carbon, getting carbon out of the atmosphere, using this amazing natural tool, right? A system of plants and nature that's in the business of capturing carbon and storing it in the landscape. And so the goal here today is to really try to provide tools for anyone working across the state of Florida to understand that better. And as Taj and Brian mentioned, communicate that better. A lot of people don't know it, don't understand the concept. And so oftentimes very basic introductions are helpful. The reports that were just provided that may be for a county or a watershed or a parcel that can identify the mitigation, what's called climate mitigation, how much carbon is stored there, how much is being stored there on an annual basis, but also other benefits that can flow to the community from protecting or restoring lands. And that's better adaptation, perhaps protection from wildfire, protection of drinking water supplies, a whole range of other benefits. And so the power of natural climate solutions is nature's always going to give you this set of three. It's going to give you resilience and adaptation to improve the community's resilience. It's going to reduce emissions or increase carbon sequestration. And it's going to help you address inequities and build opportunity in the community. So I think that, trying to think what else would be helpful in terms of wrap up, I can turn to you all as well. Before I get to sort of engagement with TPL, I think that when this runs during Florida Climate Week, we'll go through and answer questions that pop up during the chat and the conversation. And at the end here, I'll also, Kate, as our Florida lead, we have Kate's contact information for anyone to reach out to. Maybe I'll just double check to see Taj, Brian, and Kate, anything you want to add?
Yeah, Brendan, I'll add just one thing that I was reminded of as Brian was going through the demo and highlighting all of the different data sets that you can access and view. So there is a data dictionary on the project landing page where you can go in and see what are all these data sets, where are they from, how recent are they, what do they actually mean, what is a ranking if it's rated a 1 or a 5 or a 0.5, on one of those data sets in the profile report. What does that actually mean? You can get a lot of those answers through the data dictionary. Even I helped build the tool with Brian and others, and I still refer back to that data dictionary. So it's a helpful resource to review. So that was the only thing that I wanted to add.
Yeah, I have nothing to add. I think this is a very cool tool, and I look forward to playing around with it and seeing how it applies to our work in Florida that we've already done, maybe looking back to some of our, our history and the impact overall of all that work would be fun to do with this tool. So yeah, thank you for that. And looking forward to maybe some more discussion on this.
Yeah, I'll just add quickly, Taj, you remind me that as you mentioned in our schedule, this is sort of the full launch of this updated tool this fall. So Kate's information is on here. You can send it to her and pass along. We're looking very interested in any feedback folks in the audience would have as you pursue and use the tool. So very open to questions and certainly comments and suggestions as you use it. Brian, I think I interrupted you. Sorry.
No, I was going to express the thought you just conveyed. It was great to work on the tool, and now that it's out there, I'm looking forward to hearing from folks that are interacting with it. Hopefully are finding it useful for their projects and if they've got suggestions for improving it and building upon it, I'd love to hear it. So.
Yeah. All right, maybe just quickly, we very much appreciate being part of Florida Climate Week. Taj, in the next slide, just really quickly about TPL. We'd also do a little bit of a plug and promotion, to encourage you to get involved with our organization and with the work Kate, Doug, her colleagues are really helping lead in Florida and having such a huge benefit for communities there. So you can become a member of TPL at our website. Our 10-minute walk campaign that was referenced, Kate mentioned earlier, we're really pushing to have everyone have access to the outdoors and connect everyone. So the 10-minute walk campaign is another resource. We're all over social media, and so feel free to follow us and look at the content as it's developed. And we also have the sort of take action section on the website, because we do a lot of advocacy to encourage federal support on Capitol Hill for more conservation and more climate action, as well as state and local. So I encourage you to look at that as well. Maybe with that, I'll just say thanks again. Oh yeah, and there's Kate's email. Kate, feel free to forward on to us and however we can help you, hopefully you'll get barraged with all sorts of excitement and interest from colleagues across Florida.
Bring it on.
Thanks much.
Thanks, everyone.
That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you.